For anybody coming from traditional language learning to comprehensible input, it can be a little shocking to hear that the only thing you need to do to learn your target language is listen to input from your target language at a level you understand. It's totally natural to wonder, where's the grammar, where's the vocab lists, because those things are so ubiquitous in the methods of learning we're accustomed to hearing about. But in comprehensible input theory, we believe a heavy focus on grammar and looking up words too often when you're listening to your target language can actually hurt you as opposed to help you. Traditional language learning postulates that grammar is the foundation of language learning. You memorize your grammar and then you consciously apply those rules when you're listening or speaking the language. But in comprehensible input theory, grammar isn't the foundation, grammar's the result. Your brain is a pattern recognizing machine, and if you expose it to enough understandable messages in the language you're trying to learn, your brain will naturally develop an intuitive mental model of the grammar of that language without you consciously studying grammar at all. This is why native speakers like me and you speak our own native languages so well without really having a conscious understanding of the grammar we're using. If you ask most Americans or most people in your country, wherever you're from, about the grammar rules of their own language, they're not gonna know many of them. In fact, a lot of language students will probably know much more, yet they can't speak the language. This is because we have an intuitive understanding of grammar. We don't have a list of conscious rules. In traditional language learning, when you're given a sentence to read or you're listening to a sentence, you're often taught that what you need to do is break down that sentence into its rules, figure out why this verb has this ending, figure out why this word is in this order. But in comprehensible input, we're not worried about the actual mechanisms of the language. We're just worried about the message of the content. Therefore, comprehensible input learners rarely need to know the grammar to get the basic message of what we're trying to understand. Because again, we're not trying to understand the mechanics, we're just trying to understand the message. The reality is the meaning of most sentences, especially at the beginner level, comes down way more to the nouns and the verbs than the grammar. For instance, if I make a sentence like, "The boy ate the cake," you don't need to know the person of the verb. You don't need to know the case of the verb in more complex languages to know that boy and cake, boys eat cake, cakes don't eat boys. So therefore, you know who's doing who to what, as long as you know the word boy ate and cake. Now, of course, to know that's in past tense, you would need to know that ate is a past tense verb, but the fact that it was happening in past tense isn't super important to the overall meaning of the message. Grammar is something you sprinkle on top for precision, so your message is clear. But in the beginning, just getting the meaning of something doesn't require you to have an extensive knowledge of the grammar. Whether it be a conscious knowledge or a non-conscious knowledge, you should still be able to understand what the presenter is conveying. And now I want to explain why sometimes grammar gets in the way of that natural acquisition of the language. Because when you're listening to content and you're focusing on grammar, you're pulling yourself out of the natural way we connect with languages, and you're beginning to analyze. You go into a school mode and you treat the sentence like a puzzle or a math equation to solve. And the minute you do that, you're exiting our normal language learning process and you're applying a conscious process that just doesn't scale well as the language gets harder and harder to understand as it gets faster and faster. And this actually becomes a trap, and it's where we get this idea when people say, "Oh, I understand X language, but I only understand it when it's spoken slowly." What they mean is they don't have an intuitive understanding of the language. When they hear the language, they need to process it in their head, translate all the words, figure out the grammar, and then they understand. But that's not really language learning, or at least that's not how most people do language learning, or anybody does language learning when they get to a high level. Like for me and you as native speakers of our own languages, we're never doing that. And we can understand any speed, because our understanding of the language comes from pattern recognition and not conscious applications of grammar rules. In the beginning, though, you can apply grammar to basically understand the message. It makes it easier because the message is so simple and so slow that your brain does have processing time to say, okay, this means that, this means this means this, and you can put it all together. And if you have high processing speed, it's totally possible to do that. But the issue is that method of understanding a language will not scale. So as soon as you get to intermediate content or advanced content and the language becomes more natural and fast, you just end up not being able to use that conscious process. The only thing that can keep up with natural language is acquisition. Conscious thinking can't. So again, this explains the phenomenon of people saying, well, I understand a language, but not fast. It means I can consciously translate a language because of my knowledge of vocab and grammar to my own native language decently well, but if you're not speaking at a simple, slow level, I can't. Again, that's not acquisition. That's just kind of the ability to solve a puzzle in your head. Completely different, completely divorced from how we actually naturally acquire languages. So if thinking too much about grammar is a problem, why is looking up words a problem? Well, let me give you the simple rule for comprehensible input about when to look up words. It's totally fine to look up a word if the word is blocking you from understanding the meaning of the message. If you can't get the meaning of the message, then look up a word. What you should not do is every time you come across a new word, catch it like a Pokemon, throw a Pokeball at it, catch it, put it in a flashcard, and collect the words to try to understand each and every single word you hear, even if they're not pertinent to the message. Because comprehensible input, it isn't a game where we collect words. It isn't like we're getting quizzed on every word we hear. Instead, we're only interested in words so far as they help us understand the message. The issue with trying to collect vocab words and learn them maybe by flashcard or later in isolation is that you don't get the word in its natural context. It's much better to hear the word in all its different contexts many, many times so you get an idea of the frequency used of the word, the other words usually used around it, how it could kind of change in certain scenarios. All of those things give you an intuitive understanding of the word. Whereas writing a word down on a flashcard when you hear it and then practicing it later, you're practicing it in isolation. And we never hear words in isolation. You don't walk around the street hearing ice cream, child, canoe. You don't hear that. All the words we use every day in our daily lives are surrounded by other words that give those words context. Encountering these vocab words in the wild is way more beneficial and helps you acquire them way better than just memorizing the word on your own time and trying to kind of shoehorn that back into when you're watching input through conscious memory. The reality is words do not translate one-to-one with each other across different languages. There are words in English that kind of mean the same thing as words in Spanish and vice versa, but almost no word or very few words, especially verbs, are exact one-to-one translations. And that's even more true when you talk about the most common verbs. The best example of this in Spanish probably is llevar. If you look up llevar in the dictionary to figure out what it means in English, you'll probably see to wear. But then you'll hear somebody llevando una canasta de pan, and then suddenly someone's wearing a basket of bread. Or you'll hear, llevo 3 años acá, I'm wearing 3 years here. And you're like, that doesn't match up with the English verb wear at all. And if you think wear every time you hear llevar, you're just gonna confuse yourself, and because those words just don't mean the same thing. Comprehensible input will teach you the range of the word. It will teach you the context of the word. It'll teach you when it's commonly used. And you'll get a much deeper understanding of when to use it, how to use it, and what it means simply by listening to tons of input than you will by practicing these words on flashcards in isolation. In traditional learning, you're taught that you should learn words one by one, like you should learn all the colors, then you should learn all the fruits, and you should learn all this and all of that. Or you should just learn random words that you encounter in isolation in flashcards. But in comprehensible input, we're not learning full words as we go. We're learning pieces of words. You're not gonna get the full meaning of a word right away. What you're gonna get is the context, the frequency, the patterns it's used with. And again, this is just gonna help you get a deep understanding of what that word means in the target language. And eventually, when you hear the word, you'll realize, oh, I know what that word means, or I finally get what that word means entirely. And you have all of this history of understanding, all of its context, all of the ways it's used, how frequently it's used. You have all this to help you. So now it's not like you just have learned it on a flashcard in isolation. It's like, no, I've heard this word in many contexts, and now I understand what it means at a very deep level, completely divorced from what it means in my native language. Now, if you do find yourself watching content and not understanding any words, that's an issue with difficulty. you should be at least understanding, as a general rule, about 80% of the words you hear. And if you don't, that's a sign you need to drop your difficulty. As a final tip, if you are gonna look up a word, I recommend looking it up as a picture as opposed to the actual word in your native language. So that way you keep that idea of sounds directly to meaning. What you really don't want is to only understand a word in your target language as a translation of a word from your native language. Thank you for watching episode 4 of my How to Learn a Language with Comprehensible Input series. I hope you enjoyed it. The next video we're gonna do is why speaking doesn't help you learn a language and why actually doing it too early can be problematic in the long run. Finally, if you're doing comprehensible input and you want to find content and track your hours, I recommend going to my website, Lengualytics, where you will find a great platform for visually seeing yourself progress in comprehension as time goes on, and it's a great way to find content in whatever language you're learning. I have a new setting in here. There's too many cicadas outside. I don't know if you guys know what cicadas are. I'm not sure how many of you are native English speakers, but cicadas are those bugs that kind of go, like sounds like a chainsaw when they go off. They're usually like in hot weather. So I'm inside right now. I don't know why I found it necessary to explain that to you, but if you were wondering about the change of scenery, that is the reason I'm inside. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.